We got a great Little Dream co-host with us today, Pastor Randy Fuller of New Beginnings. Good morning, Pastor Randy. How you doing, sir?
Good morning, Martin. It's good to be here. Thank you.
I'm so glad that you chose to get up and add it with us. I know you're an extremely busy man as well. Before we get into the show, into a little sports talk, we share a passion, of course, for sports, but we also share a passion for pastoring and how are things at New Beginnings?
Well, they're better than we deserve, and certainly better than their leadership. But God's been good to us, and the church is thriving.
That is awesome. And if you don't know, if you're looking for a great place to worship, and you live over in the Northport area or anywhere, but if you happen to be over in that area, especially, not far from one of our sponsors, Taco Casa. Right there on Highway 82, right before you get to them, there's a little left you can take, and it's between the fish restaurant, is it Captain D?
Captain D's and the trailer store.
In the trailer store right there. Take a left, right off the road. That's New Beginning. So go check them out. Tell them real quick when your services are, so they know when to catch
every Wednesday night at 6:30 p.m. Every Sunday morning at 9:30 a.m.
All right, that is New Beginnings, and we'll give another shout out to that great church. Been doing some great work for the kingdom of God. So somebody said good morning. They were saying good morning to you, and they called you Gary, but they corrected it on Facebook.
I've been called worse. All right.
I promise you, as long as you've been pastoring, I know, and even before pastoring, you probably got called certain things. Well, there's a lot to get to. We got a couple things that we're going to talk about specifically in terms of Nick Saban, and you overheard a conversation that CJ and I had, and we were talking about Nick Saban and Alabama football. So we're going to retouch that conversation a little bit. And we're going to take a couple angles, a little different angle on it, on how can Nick Saban be better. That kind of sounds, almost hypocritical or blasphemous for us to talk about Nick Saban being better. But there's some things that Nick Saban can improve on, and one specifically that you brought up in our conversation before we came on air, and we'll talk about that. But before we do that, we have to give a shout out to two USA teams for winning a championship, and of course softball is also playing right now, and Haley McClooney with Alabama connection on that softball team. But the USA women's soccer team winning back-to-back World Cups, and also the fourth time, so congratulations to them. Any thoughts on that as a whole, just the USA women's soccer team winning that?
Well, I am extremely pleased that the United States played so well on the international scene and displayed their talents. I kind of wish it hadn't become so political.
Yeah,
but,
and you and I in the same boat there. It became so politicized that I had to fight against, and this is just Martin being real. Mm-hmm. I had to fight against almost not even wanting them to get there, because it wasn't going to be about the other 21. It was going to be about the one, Rapinoe. And hey, listen, she's worked hard to get to that stage. That's her business. That's her platform. But don't take away from all of your other teammates. Exactly. When you do that type of thing. Make it about, if you're trying to get equality for them, make it about that, but not make it about all the other stuff that they made it about. One of the things I always get tickled at, though, when people try to compare men's soccer and women's soccer. In women's soccer, those are some of the best female athletes in the world. On the USA soccer team, the men's soccer team, those guys wouldn't even be, a lot of them, and I'm not being ugly with this, a lot of those wouldn't even be in the top 4 or 5 athletes in the world. Just think if we were to go out and put LeBron James and Kevin Durant at goalie. I mean, if we were to start putting our best athletes out there, what was the running back from Adrian Peterson? I don't even know the positions, but I think they got one called a striker, right? I mean, Adrian Peterson. I know that sounds horrible, but the reality of it is, most countries, the best male athletes in the world are playing soccer,
right?
But in the U.S., it's probably at best fourth or fifth sport.
Probably.
Yeah. So, and it's gaining some popularity. So I'm not dogging it. James, come on, help me out. I stepped in something. So, but Do you agree with that?
I do. I mean, it's just because it's not that popular a sport, it hasn't drawn that much attention compared to the rest of the world.
Right.
It's a world sport there. Here it's a secondary or
now,
third-tier
overall,
sport.
you'd be correct, but if you look at folks younger than me, soccer has been growing for a few years now when it comes to a spectator sport. You go to Birmingham, especially among the young professionals, soccer is a pretty big deal.
Yeah, but the question becomes what? The question becomes, is that still the best athletes, though? It's getting popular, and it's more popular, and more people are playing it, but are you still getting the best athletes? And that's what I was – I'm not talking about
as far as the women, probably. So
women,
the men, that's a whole nother ballgame.
That's what I'm saying in terms of the men. So,
Right.
But anyway, congratulations to the U.S. women's soccer team. And I wasn't sure if yesterday was the end of the USA Under-19 softball. They won a medal. I don't know exactly what, but I know I was watching the game, and they were playing against Japan yesterday, and they were losing and then made a rally in the bottom of the sixth, and then I left and didn't get to catch up on it. But also in basketball, good news for USA Under-19. They won the overall competition tournament. But great news for Alabama is Kyra Lewis got some great experience there, Kyra Lewis Jr. So you much of a basketball guy?
I like basketball. I have to be honest, the highlight for me in basketball was when Coach Sanderson was here.
Well, yeah.
I haven't really been that connected to it since those days. I'm looking forward to what Coach Oates is going to do here. I'm kind of excited about seeing the kind of product he's going to put on the floor and what kind of style they're going to play.
Yeah, so I'm sort of – I love basketball. I think I call myself the frustrated guy that quit growing. So that kind of gets us jocks that were really bigger than everybody when we were little. So we were the most dominant basketball players. Then all of a sudden we stopped growing and everybody else kept going.
That's right.
That's kind of my role. But I love basketball, and I'm like you. The most exciting time of Alabama basketball for me was also I was in school when Wimp was here and was able to go and see that. And so he created more. He made basketball bigger than just what you saw on the court.
Absolutely.
It was an experience, and it seems like that's what Coach Oates is in the process of doing in terms of creating some excitement. So having one of your players on the international stage definitely didn't hurt
Absolutely.
what he's trying to accomplish. So, but definitely looking forward to a great show. Let me make sure I remind listeners that they can call in, be a part of the show. Taco Casa, quality, taste, and value since 1974. 6 locations in Tuscaloosa and West Alabama to better serve you. So give us a call on the Taco Casa hotline at 205-342-9904, 205-342-9904. You can be a part of the program, part of the conversation. All you have to do is call that hotline. Randy Fuller will be here to answer your questions. He's the expert today, so give him a call. And what we're going to be talking about here, I mean, he brought it up. We talked about it on Monday. We replayed it on Friday, talking about how Alabama could be better. We talked about what Alabama could do to become a better team. And maybe then we also talked about how they're worn down at the end of the season. We talked about the number of games. We talked about the competition down the stretch. But Pastor Randy had a different take on it. Maybe a weakness or the Achilles heel of Nick Saban, and that's talking about how you know what? Let's just go ahead and go to break here, and I'll you hold on to that thought. Stay tuned. Nick Saban has a glaring weakness, and it may have cost us down the stretch this past year. It may have actually caught up with us when someone else had as much talent and as much depth as we did. We'll talk about that more right here on the Blitz.
You'll see Martin Houston, he played his first game. He's a redshirt freshman in at fullback, and he was a little short on his block there, but it was just enough to get us in the end zone. Saran dove across the plane. Here on the replay, this is just a simple sweep. Lamont Russell does a good job. Kevin Turner, who's playing the wing position, knocks his man on the ground. And then Martin Houston gets just enough of this guy Not what we want, but just enough for Saran to make a great athletic move and get it in the end zone.
Was that from Memphis?
Your very first game and Eli Gold's very first game behind the CTSN mic.
That was my very, very first play ever at Alabama, actually. I thought that was a play he was describing, and I told Saran, thanks for making me look good after that. It was a sweep around left end, and I was able to get, as Coach Curry said, just enough of the guy for Saran to get in. And Saran made me look good on a lot of blocks, and I appreciate it. So, but anyway, you're back in with the Blitz on Tide 102.9, 100.9. We got Coach, Pastor Coach, listener, follower, Randy Fuller in studio with us this morning. We're going to be talking a little bit about Nick Saban. And last week we were talking about Alabama being worn down the stretch, and we talked about several different reasons that was the case. And some of those reasons had to do with the players who were how much the players played and who they played and where they played and the opponents that we played. But Randy had a different approach, and we want to talk about that angle. And I said a weakness. You have a different way to describe it, but when you watch Coach Saban, what's one of the things we're now, instead of him calling in Elko and all those guys, he called us in.
Okay.
So Coach, get your pen and paper out. We're about to help you dominate. We're going to help Coach dominate even more college football. So what have you seen in terms of what, if you were advising Coach, what would be the first thing you would talk to him to help him become better?
Okay, well, first, my armchair quarterback observation, and that's all that is.
Yes.
And I'm going to give the example first, Martin, and then I'm going to highlight it. In the national championship game, there was something that I noticed that I don't know if anyone else noticed. I'm sure they did, but something that stood out to me. We're getting beat by 4 touchdowns. Now, let me stop there and say I know that this was a perfect storm. A lot of things came into play with coaching, injuries, a rested team on the other side of the sidelines, didn't have as difficult to schedule, et cetera, et cetera. We're getting beat 4 touchdowns, and Clemson is running the ball on us for 4, 5, and 6 yards a clip. When the whistle blew at the end of that game, every single starting defensive player for the University of Alabama was on the field. Now, we always say, if we want the other team to stop trying to score, then give the indication by making, substitutions. Now, why do we have that attitude, but we don't want to play with it? There were a lot of players that are good players, fantastic players, 4- and 5-star players who were not injured, not worn down, standing on the sideline, national championship game, helmets on, strapped up, and never got in the game or played 1 or 2 snaps. My question is, and I think everyone has a blind spot. I think everyone has a weakness, and if you don't, then your weakness is that you can't see your weakness.
Right.
Coach Saban has a pro mentality, and he has a trust factor that does not allow him to substitute as freely as he could, and in my opinion, as he should. Because, as I mentioned to you in the text, in the SEC, and for the most part, parity across the college football Division I, first 22 match up really well. After that, you have drastic fall-offs. Alabama's strength is that beginning with 23 and going through 85, we have more talent than you do. That is not being exploited by playing the number of players. When we played 90 snaps against Clemson and we played 30 players and we have 85 players, we did not use our numbers to our advantage. And that's my point. My point is that the players need to be in the game, especially players that you know are going to be 3-year players. Put them in the game, especially in these weaker, and let them play significant snaps. LeBron Ray, Barmore, all those guys. Those guys need to be coming into this season with some notches on their belt, not cutting their teeth.
Yeah. And so James, when you look at it in terms of the offense and defense, do you think that, to his point, on that last drive, we still had our starting lineup in the game?
Oh, by the way, fellas, I looked at the participation chart for that Clemson game. 50 players were utilized total.
And now, is that counting?
That's everybody that got on the field.
And that's special teams and everything.
Correct.
Yeah. So when you start looking at it, when you look at the number that actually played within the lesser thing, and it's not that big a deal when you have a team that's not as talented as you are.
Right.
But what makes this point that you're making even more dramatic is that this was a 4-point deficit in the fourth quarter. And you still had your starters in
4 touchdowns,
and you still had your starters in the national championship game. And Clemson could have scored. We talk about getting beat 44 to whatever, 16. It could have easily have been 51. Clemson it almost like they were just trying to run the clock out, and we couldn't stop them.
Absolutely. And I got news for you. If it had been a guy down in South Alabama, he'd have hung what he called 60 on us.
Yeah.
He'd have hung 60 on us.
Well, he definitely wasn't playing against the Steve Spurrier either. When Spurrier said, "It's your responsibility to stop me, not my responsibility to stop myself." So you mentioned something, that NFL mentality. You said he has an NFL mentality. What do you mean by that, him having an NFL mentality?
Well, they have smaller numbers. Their players have to play longer. You're going to go with the ones that are proven. The NFL game is adapting to the college game, but the college game, because they have more players, are able to play faster. They do that because there's lack of parity. This was something I'm glad you asked that, because it's something I wanted to say. The reason that the spread concept began was because teams didn't have the amount of talent.
Right.
So they wanted to play one-on-one ball and hope you missed a tackle so that they could make some yards. They did not have the personnel to go 11-11 in a box and beat you. The other tactic of going fast was, we don't want you to substitute. So now we've got you spread out without substitutions. Why don't they want you to substitute? Because fresh players play fast.
Yeah.
Say that with me. Fresh players play fast.
Yeah.
Even if they're making a few mistakes,
Yeah.
they're making them wide open.
Yeah.
And so and
they can compensate even when they're more talented than you, and they play fast and they make a mistake, they're still able.
Absolutely.
A lot of times, especially from the defensive side of the ball, it only takes, on offense, it takes 11 guys working together, unless you spread us out and get somebody out in space like you're talking about. But on defense, one guy that's fresh can compensate for 8 or 9 guys that made a mistake.
Absolutely.
And that's why you don't want that substitution.
Absolutely. I want the guy on my defense that's firing off and play. I'd rather, smart is important. Fast and aggressive, to me, is more important when we're playing that many snaps and that many games.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about putting somebody out there that just picked up their helmet off the
Right.
off the bench and has never played. But we should be 3 deep. Okay, we should be 3 deep with enough players that know the play.
Yeah.
And knows the concept.
Well. To magnify what you're talking about, Alabama played 15 games last year. Tua Tagovailoa did not play in the third quarter till when? Didn't play. Had going into the Georgia game, I think he had 3 passes in the fourth quarter, something like that.
He really didn't play a meaningful third quarter until maybe the LSU game.
Right, and then he didn't play but 3 snaps. I think he had more than 3 snaps, but threw 3 passes, I think, in the fourth quarter. So how does a team that had a starting quarterback who doesn't play that much come into this season with no depth on defense? To make your point,
right?
How do you not have linebackers that have significant experience? How do you not have more defensive linemen with significant experience coming into the season, except for what you're talking about, the fact that you don't, and I think the word you said, liberal substitution. Not that he doesn't substitute,
right?
But it's very, very strategic. I mean, meaning that it's like this guy's going to substitute here, here, and here, and then like as far as just mass substitution or liberal substitution, Nick Saban, that's just one of those things that he's never really done a lot of. But we've not ran across somebody that was as good or better in the first 22 as Clemson was. Clemson could match us. That team going into that game, I don't even know if you know this, their records were whichever team won that game was going to have the best 4-year record.
Right. I didn't know that.
Yes. They ended up winning 60 games, right, James? And we won 59. And they had three, correct me, James, 3 ACC titles. And we had 2 or 3 and 2 and then they had one more than we did because we played for a national title without winning the SEC. So when we beat Georgia, so they had 3 titles, and so if they got that one win, that put them over the top. So that tells you that was evenly matched teams, and Clemson, was fresh and rested, so they were not as important for them to substitute.
Let me answer that question. Coach Saban is a defensive coach. Mm-hmm. That's his baby, and he has such a high standard, and I'm grateful for it. But what happens is, to be able to get youngsters experience, they're going to make mistakes. Mistakes equal yardage gained, points allowed. Coach Saban does not want the team to allow the other team to score. So he doesn't put a player on the field unless he feels like that he can play to the same standard as the guy in front of him. When we saw 11 defensive starters on the field, 28 points down on the last whistle, what you saw was PRIDE, and it was writing a check that it couldn't cash at the expense of the starting players.
Yeah, and interestingly, that mentality, but it seemed like he gave up at halftime. I mean, did you see the same thing that I saw? The conversation at halftime, the look and the expression, and this is another side story when you look at the quarterback situation. I agree with starting Tua in the second half, but I didn't agree with keeping Tua in as long as he did, because you needed to give your offense and your team some type of spark.
Right.
And Tua was not the one to give that, but it was that same mentality of, I'm going with the starters, I'm going with the guy that has gotten all the reps, and I'm not going to substitute right now. And that is some of that pride, even though it looked like to me he had surrendered shortly after halftime.
The writing was on the wall.
Yeah.
The writing was on the wall. You could see it. You could see it in the play. Now, the players played hard, and I know Coach Saban, if he was here, probably would hang a cussing on me and slap me on the tail like he did AJ. And that's okay. I understand that. But that would have been an excellent opportunity right there to say, look, guys, they got our number tonight. What we're going to do is we're going to pull you guys and let these other guys that have worked hard all year, that don't have a scuff mark on their shirt, we're going to let them play. And we're going to go out here and we're just going to chalk this one up till we'll get it fixed in the spring and the fall. But it was really, really, to me, and it was hurtful to see some of those guys that were starting on the defensive linebacker, to be giving it all that they had, and the ball was just being marched down their throat.
Yeah.
And they're limping and gimping. I'm going, come on, man, pull those guys and put some of the young bucks in, and let's say, okay, today the better man, the better team whipped our tail. They MTAQ'd us. Yep. Now let's just make this a lesson.
Yeah, and you just used the 4 letters there. Nick Saban came to this university with a philosophy, and for the first time as that game was going on, all I could say was we just got bammered.
We did.
We got bammered, and I want to talk about that when we come back. MTAQ, the Nick Saban philosophy. Did he get too far away from it? Was it a result of just time? Was it a result of conscious decisions? Was it one decision that led to it down the road? Was it a process? What happened that Alabama no longer was a team that MTAQ'd people? And we'll tell you what that means on the other side of the break. Coming back right here on the Blitz. Remember, Southmark Design, Scott Smith and his team would love the opportunity to help you. They're the official outfitter of the Blitz, and he looks forward to the opportunity to working with you. At Scott Smith, Southmark Design, you can find him at southmarkdesign.com or call him at 205-292-4680, 205-292-4680. That's Scott Smith, Southmark Design, the official outfitter of the Blitz. Coming back on the other side, we're going to have this MTAQ conversation, and Gregory also wanting to talk about depth and developing depth right here on your home for Alabama Sports Talk 102.9 and 100.9. This is the Blitz. It's time for the second half of the Blitz as we kick off the third quarter. We got in studio Live the Dream co-host Pastor Randy Fuller of New Beginnings Church, also a longtime friend and acquaintance, regular listening to Tide 102.9, 100.9 throughout the day, was able to get up and be in with us this morning.
Enon, that's a friend of the station, by the way. Randy, he's waiting on the fired up Sunday morning version of you to come out.
So this is Denon, you said? Yes. Thanks, Denon. Denon's a regular contributor, regular listener to the show as well. Let's go ahead and get Gregory. And before we get, after we get Gregory on, we're going to get back to that conversation about the philosophy that Nick Saban had. Was it impacted a little bit possibly by the lack of substitution? I mean, can you do that? Can you make people do what he wants to do when you're not subbing and everybody else around you is getting better, meaning the talent is better? So we'll talk about that, but let's get to Gregory wanting to talk about depth and developing depth. Gregory in with the Blitz with Randy and Martin. How you doing, sir?
How you doing, man? I just listen to the show. I just agree with the Pastor Randy Fuller. You know what I'm saying? About
Fuller. Yeah, yes. That's okay.
About, not playing enough players, especially on defense. And I believe it call up Wills, with the depth, Like he said when we played against Clemson, our starter was in there longer, and, this shouldn't, we should have been getting ready for the next season, with the depth and, with the new experience,
and that's just hard
to that long.
Is that not hard to say, Gregory, that we were playing a championship game, and we were getting beat so bad that we legitimately had a chance to prepare for the next season because we had no chance of winning that game?
Well, really, in the fourth quarter, Nick Saban really throw the flag in.
Oh, I think
really
absolutely.
You know what I'm saying?
And that's why Randy is saying it was so confusing, Gregory, is because
the writing was on the wall, and yet we still wanted to play our starting defensive line and defensive players.
See, that's what I'm saying. That's something that I didn't understand myself. You know what I'm saying? We thrown in the flag. You know what I'm saying? We did not, give early players a chance, envelop. Cause they worked all, like you said, all summer. They're like the rest of the players. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Well, I think Gregory, I think more so than just preparing for the next year, I think it would have done two things. Number one is it's a vote of confidence to the players that get to go in the national championship game. Secondly, it's a reward for all that, as you said, for all that they've done for the team. Their mamas and daddies are sitting up there and they're going, if we're down 28 points and my son didn't get to play, how bad do we have to get beat? Or how bad is he for my son to get to play?
Yeah.
Right. We think the same way, I promise you. And I got another question. Do you believe to have all your eggs in one basket?
What are you referring to? And then I'll let Randy.
The offense. The offense. Last season we always said the offense should have. We're gonna depend on the offense. You know what I'm saying? To take us, to pick up the load we need. Is that like something with new to us? Bama fan call. We always depend on our defense.
right.
Defense had a little part of it.
All right. Thanks, Gregory. Go ahead, Randy.
All right.
Go ahead.
Well, the number of players leaving, the turnover, and what we have players, we just don't have at that time the number of experienced players. And again, going back to the point that we've been trying to make, Coach Saban has such a high standard on defense, for the team, but on defense, that if he doesn't have 100% confidence that you're knowing what you're doing, the likelihood of you seeing the playing field in a game that is very significant and still in the balance is slim and none. So what happened was we had an extreme amount of talent on the offensive side. We were talented but inexperienced on the defensive side. We had some early injuries before camp started, taking Lewis and those guys out. So we became an offensive heavy team.
Yeah, and Randy, when you look at that offensive heavy team, a lot of times mentality, one or the other helps each other. In other words, you can have a really, really aggressive defense, which in turn makes your offense more physical and more aggressive.
Right.
And vice versa. You can have a really aggressive offense, physical offense, and it helps your defense. Nick Saban, when he stood at that podium when he first got here, MTAQ, make their blank quit.
Right.
That's what, as C.J. Watson says, make their rump quit.
Right.
You know, he wanted them he wanted teams to know that they had played a football game.
Exactly.
And that was our reputation. When do you think that started to change? And do you think that this hopefully this year in the Clemson game was the pinnacle of that transition and we're going to go back?
Specifically, it went by the wayside and was began to be introduced when we got away from the pistol formation. And when we went to basically taking all the snaps in the shotgun and running out of the shotgun, which is not a downhill running scheme,
right,
and spreading the ball, we morphed because we have had and have now the best talent at wide receiver and quarterback that we've ever had, Jalen and Tua, and the wide receivers and the running backs. And so what we did was we got sucked into the pinball game, into the video game football, and we went full-blown Oklahoma on offense. Well, what happened was when you play full-blown Oklahoma offense, your defense morphs into a full-blown Oklahoma defense because you are what you play against.
Yes.
And so that's why we struggled.
Yeah, and that's that. You just nailed my point, because when you look at it from think of some examples. What's the worst defense you can think of that has a lot of talent? Oklahoma. Why? Because football, you can't play physical football and learn to tackle if you don't do it.
Right.
And you can't learn to play in a box if you're always playing spread out. And so Oklahoma has to try to run like when I first came here as a freshman, we used to have to implement the other team's offense for our defense. Well, you didn't have to worry about that being difficult for freshmen and for guys who weren't quite at the level that maybe redshirted or second or third year players, because they didn't have to be as talented to implement. They don't have to be as fast, and they didn't have to be as athletic. But do you know how hard it is to implement and get your team ready for a spread offense and all that? And then you're not physically hitting each other on top of it.
Right. And, well, if you'll notice how we've been recruiting in the last couple of years, we're going a little bit lighter on defense, and we're going for speed. And I think so. You've got to be able to cover the field. Understand that. But that doesn't mean that on offense we have to play that way.
Right.
If the most of the teams that we play spread and go fast, then you've got to have the personnel to be able to spread and go fast and stay on the field first, second, third down, minimizing substitutions if you don't have the time to substitute. That's why I go back to the TV timeouts, or if there is a timeout or if there is the chance to substitute, you need to take advantage of that, because the opportunities for substitution in those type games are slim and none. And I remember watching, I was junior high school, I remember watching Coach Bryant script an entire offensive line substitution in the second quarter against Mississippi State. Because he knew he had more players, and if it was a game in the third and fourth quarter, he was going to MTAQ you simply by overwhelming you with numbers. And that's our advantage, and I don't think that we're playing to it.
And that's a scary thought, Randy, because when you think about the fact that we're already a dominant team, what would happen if we force people to have to play against the entirety of the depth of Alabama football in terms of our talent level? So we're gonna continue that conversation. I want to talk to you on the other side of the break as we wrap up this edition of the Blitz. I want to talk to you a little bit more about what's happening with this offense, and can Alabama transition back? Is Nick Saban going to go back to what's familiar to us and what I personally like to watch as a football fan? I believe you pointed out earlier in the program, teams went to the spread because they couldn't match up. And people went to the option. If we go back to our days as kids, people went to the option when they couldn't match up because it gave a little deception and made you slow down. It slowed you down and made you guess. Well, that's what spread has become. Who's going to be the first coach to realize that everybody is now set up to stop a spread and not to stop a power running game? And to me, everybody thinks that you have to go back to 3 yards in a cloud of dust to run a power offense.
No.
I remember Homer Smith, we had more passing yards than anybody up until recent years under Gary Hollingsworth. And A.J. McCarron was throwing for over 3,000 yards, 3,500 yards as well. So it's not like that means that you're not going to be able to throw the ball around the field. So I want to talk about, is Nick Saban giving us a little insight into he may be trying to go back down that road and now create a distinct advantage from the offense by going back to what he knows now that he's totally, I guess, transformed his defense into more of a spread type of athlete.
Right.
But now the mentality has to, MTAQ mentality has to come back. We'll come back on the other side. We're going to finish up this fourth quarter edition of the Blitz with the Live the Dream co-host, Pastor Randy Fuller of New Beginnings, right here on your home for Alabama sports. You're back in with the Blitz. The University of Oral and Facial Surgery 2-minute warning is up on us. Pastor Randy finding out how fast this show can get away from you. You don't get to everything you give. It's been a great show, so I want to encourage you. You'll be able to go back and listen to it at Tide1029.com. Also, I'm sure James will have something up on YouTube, Tide1029 on YouTube as well. We got a comment from Virgil Williams talking about, could the lack of substitution be that the younger coaches were trying to make a name for themselves? Go back a few years when we had older coaches and we did substitute more. We did substitute more, but you can still see that NFL pattern. And I do think the coaching and all of that, I think as I think when you first start off, you said it was a perfect storm. There was a lot of things going on. But the major point you were trying to point out is that it was a fourth quarter, down by 4 scores, and the starters ended the game.
Right.
That's the part that you like, come on, really? What? I mean, that's a blind spot. We can call it, we can give him the title that he's earned, the greatest coach ever, but his blind spot on that night was glaring that he still had the starters in, even though the young coaches probably didn't substitute well throughout the season as well as throughout that game, because it's obvious we should have more experience on the defensive side of the ball than what we do coming back.
Right. And I think one of the things that showed up that night, Martin, is that we were not able to hold on to the football. Mm-hmm. And when you are beat up, run the gauntlet, you've got to be able to play what Coach Saban's term was MTAQ, and that means that you ground and pound. And that doesn't mean that you just run it 25 straight times. But I would if they couldn't stop it.
Well, that's, a lot of people, when you and I are sitting here talking about, and people just get cringe when I start talking about offense because they think I'm a dinosaur, or as a fullback, I'm a relic,
Right.
So, but the reality of it is, the offense I want to see is what we saw in the first half against Clemson when Bo Scarborough got hurt.
Right.
That offense was no doubt you had both. You had the passing game and the running game, but when you wanted to, you could line up and run it. And to me, RPO just makes the game too finesse when you go against a Georgia, a Mississippi State, or a Clemson that has the talent that you have or better in some spots. You can't finesse those guys, and you can't just flip a switch and become a power team because you want to.
Right, absolutely. And there was no place more indicative of that than when we got down on I can't remember now, 6, 5, 6, 7, 8 yard line. We needed 2 or 3 yards that we threw the football. We threw the football. Alabama threw the football needing 2 or 3 yards in the red zone. And we have 225-pound running backs. We had a ginormous offensive line. We got sucked into playing another style of football, lost our confidence, and then like an old boxer whose eye can still see it, but his hand can't get there. We couldn't make it happen like we used to, and so we got to where, and I hate to say this, we got to where we were trying to trick people. Now think about that. Yeah. Alabama is trying to trick people.
Yeah, and that's the result of this RPO style of offense and having a talented quarterback. And don't get me wrong, we need to maximize the wide receivers we have.
No doubt.
But there's a way to maximize the wide receivers and not finesse the game down and play physical. CJ Watson had a question I want to ask you before we get off there. Did superior talent leaving early for the NFL finally catch up to and impact the depth and development that we saw this past year?
Absolutely, CJ. And here's the point. We're supposed to know that that's going to happen. We're supposed to foresee that. And the time that you prepare for that is during the season by getting other players some experience. And we had some players that were chomping at the bit. They just don't have. And CJ, here's the thing about that: they don't have that experience this year either. They don't. Just because you're a junior does not mean you have experience. It means you have experience at practice. But if you haven't played some significant snaps in your redshirt freshman or sophomore year, when you hit the field, you're not experienced.
Yeah, and that to your point, that's the whole key to this year. For the third year in a row, we've had 10 or more players go in the NFL draft. You have to be playing the backup guys to compensate for that. And there was no greater season than this past season to have that opportunity to do that. And I don't think we maximized the amount of time we could have got the younger guys playing time compared to the opportunity that we had.
Well, I want to say this before the show is over. In my humble opinion, from the quarterback chair in Northport, Alabama, if Alabama wants to finish the season with Tua Tagovailoa as the quarterback, if we want to maximize our chances of finishing the season with our starting quarterback and winning a national championship, we better protect him. And by that I mean not with just the left tackle and right tackle, but we need to run the ball downhill, make the defenses crowd the line of scrimmage, and play action over the top, and also to throw to the backs. If we go in the out from under center, if we go and snap the ball deep, and we start letting Tua sit back there, and these defenses can pin their ears back, they're going to knock him up in the cheap seats.
You know why they can pin their ears back? Because even when you run the ball, the running back is waiting right beside the quarterback. So I heard defensive coaches, this is your philosophy, tackle the running back on the way to the quarterback.
Absolutely.
And if you got that shotgun, that's what begins to happen. And when you have talent that's superior, you can play a little different ball there. Closing thoughts, Coach.
Hey, well, listen, I don't want anyone to think that I am a smart football coach. I'm not. I'm a pastor, and everybody's going to probably tell me, stick with preaching. But these are just observations, and I think that Coach Saban does realize this. Not because he's talked to me, he certainly didn't have time for me, but I think other people. He's a smart man, and he's not the greatest and he didn't get to where he is by being stupid and unenlightened. But I think Alabama's going to turn the corner this year, and I hope that what we are anticipating comes to fruition. If it does, we're going to have a good year.
That is Pastor Randy Fuller, New Beginnings, right there in Northport, Alabama.